And hello, everyone. It's like all new faces. I think I had the pleasure to do a lecture last year in December about all things sport, but for that I had a little over 3 hours. Now we have 40 minutes and counting. So I'll try to condense a lot of things, but today we're not going to talk about port wine as such. I'll give you a very brief introduction so that we will be all on the same page. But after that, we will hit the product side and really what School of Port is all about, which leads me, I reckon, to the next slide. So I am here representing School of Port, which is an educational initiative launched in 2020 by the Symington Family Estates. More about them in a minute. So what the aim of School of Port is to educate the consumers and the trade about port wine and the complex category, for reasons you will actually see in a couple of minutes why this education is needed. We do that in mostly informal, easy to digest ways, and we have our own dedicated website with video lectures, interviews, Q&As, useful information. We've got Instagram. We've got an Instagram live, of which you are now all part of. The whole world is watching us, well, at least the port world. And basically what we also do is like face-to-face tastings and courses like this one. So on that note, moving on to the Symington Family Estates. So the Symington Family Estates is in the port business for a short 130 years. And they are very connected to the Douro Valley and the people there and the culture. And although, as the name suggests, their heritage is mostly British, English and Scottish, but also they are sort of married into Portuguese families. So it's still a wholly family-owned company, and it's currently being led by the fourth and fifth generation of the family. They are the largest private landowners in the Douro. They own about 1,100 hectares. And they also buy up a lot of grape from smallholders and other farms. And they came up with the idea of, the key to the future is to break the mold of what people have in their minds about port wine. Someone mentioned a dusty tawny. That's one of the molds we have to break, because although you can find a dusty tawny, but I'll show you some very good examples of fresh and young one. Which is fun. That's about Symington Family Estates, really. They own and they are the caretakers of some of the largest known port brands like the Dows, the Woos, the Grahams, the Coburns. If you buy that, it's actually owned by the Symington Family Estate, and they look after their heritage. But then moving on, it's basically before we actually jump into sustainability. So just a quick note, let's say, see if I can put it into 4 minutes, like, hello, it's okay. I'll give you some space. So in 4 minutes, I try to summarize like what port wine is. Some of you might know, some of you, it might be new information. There's plenty of space there. And some glasses too. So what is port? So port wine is a sweet fortified wine coming from northern Portugal, from the designated wine region of the Douro Valley, that starts about 80 kilometers inland alongside the river Douro and lasts until the Spanish border. If you so basically this is where the wine originates, where the grapes are from. And this is where the vinification happens, but then the aging either happens at the point of origin in the Douro Valley, or in Villanova de Gaia. For the reason being is that there's a significant climatic difference between the two areas. So Villanova de Gaia is just by the Atlantic Ocean, opposite the river to Porto, and it has a very mild climate, a mild summer, not overly cold winter. Plenty of rain, but reasonably constant humidity, perfect for slower aging. So that's why the wines that are made in the Douro Valley are then transferred to Gaia for aging. There's a strong English influence on the port wine trade in general. because over the time, back 150, 200 years ago, And still today, England is the center of the wine trade, so that had an influence on almost all the wine regions known. Porto included. Lots of families and names come from English heritage, but this is a predominantly very, very Portuguese product. Port wine is always a blend of a blend of different grapes, different sites, different altitudes, different aspects, and depending on the port style, even different vintages. So it's a blend of it's a huge variety. It's one of its core value is the versa that you will see it in a jiff. The point is that the port wine is made that after a short fermentation, 36 to 48 hours, the fermentation is interrupted by with addition of grape spirit, 77% alcohol, which is odorless, colorless, tasteless. Its only purpose is just to stop the fermentation and keep some of the residual sugar in the wine. Hence, all port wines are sweet. Even the ones that says chip dry on the bottle, it still has some residual sugar. It's always about a balance of the sugar and the acid, which I'm sure you guys all know how it works better than I do. And basically, just a few words about the styles. So we've got white ports, which are made predominantly white. It's made only from white grapes, but then it's made the same way as the red ones. And then they can be bottled fresh and young, and they can be aged as much as any other red ports. Then we've got ruby ports, which is, as it sounds by the name, it's made out of red grapes. And it can be bottled fresh, or it can be bottled ready for aging in bottle, unfined, unfiltered, depending on the style. And it can be, again, the blend of different vintage, or it can be a vintage designated wine like your well-known vintage port, for example, or the late bottle vintages. Tawny ports are the one, again, very imaginative name. As you can imagine, it's because of the color, because these are the wines that continue aging in smaller oak. So whereas ruby starts in vats, 10,000, 20,000 liters, and then transferred into mostly bottle, filtered or unfiltered. Tawnies are kept in wood, but in smaller ones, so it's faster oxidation. It changes the color, changes the taste profile. And again, it can be bottled after 7 years, or it can be left in the cask for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, or 80 plus years, and then you will have something very different. Same way to start, but it's a different end. I think that's just about a very quick port overview. And then we jump into what we are here today. And then basically it's, I start with a word that is very well known and used, sometimes overused and never really explained, and it's sustainability. If you're in the wine trade, or you will hear this a lot. Everyone wants something that's sustainable, rightfully so, because it is important for many reasons. But then the definition is basically the ability to maintain or support a process over time. Usually it's broken down to 3 categories: environmental, social, and economical. This time, I think I will go into 4, because I divide the economical part into business and product, because we will predominantly focus on product today. So answering your question, so it's the porous material is one source of oxidation for that, but also the wrecking and sort of topping up, because obviously there's a loss of liquid, mostly water and some alcohol, but that concentrates everything else. So if you don't top up, you would end up like half a barrel. In 40 years, you would lose half your liquid. And that would be disastrous, so it's undrinkable. It might be good for blending, but not for drinking. So they regularly use the same quality if it's year designated, and it would be the same vintage wines to top it up. So that's how it works.
Top from barrel to barrel.
Yes. So they always have a full barrel. They don't let it deplete too much. So going back now that the wine started its journey. Oh, sorry. Yes, a question? For the white port, there's 114 grape varieties in the Douro, and they would use any white grape that they have on the Quinta. This white port is going to be very specific. I'll tell you more about it when we get to it, but white ports can be a huge variety again, and very often there's something that in Portugal is called a field mix, which means that they have no idea what they have on the field. They just know that this is a good source for the right port, and they use it from generation to generation. But it's often, especially in vintage port, when you look at it, it says like 60% Touriga Nacional, 30% Touriga Franca, and X percentage of field mix, or we don't know really. But then for this particular white port, there's a specialty to it. We'll get to that in a jiff. So sustainability, just quickly, because when you're running your own wine business, there are certain things that you have to look at. So first, the natural environment. It's important because this is a trade that's rooted in nature. This is inevitable. You can't go around it. If you don't look after your natural environment, then you're buggered within a couple of generations. So climate change adaptation, CO2 reduction, biodiversity protection, water efficiency, sustainable packaging and waste management are just a couple of areas that, as a respectful winemaker who looks after the environment, has to consider. There's no way around. If you think sustainability is important for you as a business. The social fabric is another thing, because this is not just a product that relates to people. It's also the people who make the wine in conjunction with nature. And it's absolutely important that as a wine producer, you would have a thriving workforce. You do have an impact on the community, whether you like it or not. You just have to manage it that it's a positive impact. The existential, educational, cultural support for the wider area where you operate is important, and sourcing locally. So not just the grapes, but the packaging, the tubes, the glass if you can, the cork. We're in Portugal, so that's a bit easier than for anyone else. But then just to make sure that you source everything locally, the paper for your marketing material, etc. So if you think about it, how many things you need as a wine producer to create your product and to advertise it, that's all that you have to think of. And then, of course, you've got a business to run. So if your business is not sustainable, then it doesn't matter how good you are in the first two, you will fail, because you must sustain a business. You must stay in the green. So that's very important, to govern your business responsibly. You would have your mission, vision, and values, and you would always sort of like keep it under check, so you would know that it's up to date. If the world changes, you might have to change with it. Very important. Innovation, efficiency. These sound like pretty much like boring keywords, but when you have 1,100 hectares plus what you buy in, and you have to create products, then innovation is key, as you will see with all these wines, by the way. Efficiency, there's no question about it. If you're not efficient as a business, then you will fail. I think it requires no more explanation. Understanding the market and managing your risk is another thing. It might be a completely different lecture, which we'll not go into. We will move on to the product, which is really what School of Port is all about, supporting the product. So first, you have to focus on the core values. So your product must reflect high quality and the best that you can create. You have to keep it relevant, so you must know what people really want, and then you meet their needs. So it doesn't matter how good a quality is, if it tastes bad, or if it's too alcoholic, or anything too much, then it won't work, because it might be a perfect product, but no one will buy it because they don't want it. And of course, you have to tell your story right. So no one will know that you have the best product in the world unless you tell them. And this is where School of Port comes in the picture. So question time, which you already started. So guys, just quickly, you can shout in if you want to. Now it's time for shout. But why do you think people drink wine? I'll give you some hints. So here are the typical things that you can, researchers found: enjoying themselves, and having fun, celebration, as you said, sense of togetherness. So it's good to sit down and have a chat, but isn't it so much better when you have a glass of port in front of each of you? See, there you go. We already elevated the conversation. Aroma and flavor sensation, which is a fancy way of saying that it's good when it tastes good. So it must taste good. You have to enjoy what you drink. Otherwise, why would you drink it? Pairing with food, isn't it just good that when you have a nice wine, you taste it, you have a nice food, but when you match them and the pairing works, it's just magical. Just elevates the food and the wine. So that's another reason. And of course, tradition, culture, which I will have a few words about in a jiff, because there are certain, for example, New Year's Eve, champagne, Formula One, Mum, and Ferrari. Yes, thank you. Um, Christmas. Did someone say port? Okay, good. But then here are some of the core values of port that you might not think of, even if you are a port drinker. So first, all is outstanding quality. Even the entry-level one is beautiful, fruit-forward, still aged for at least 2 years. Only sites with A, B, or C level. So it's all good quality. Uniqueness, because port always comes from this one region, which is effectively about 250,000 hectares, about 42,000 hectares on the wine, around 70 million bottles a year. It sounds like a lot, but then you have to sort of like serve it worldwide, so it's not that much, and it's tightly controlled as a market. So it's unique. It has a deep history. So Symington Family Estate is in the business for 130 years, but the port is at least twice as old as a category, if not more. Versatility, because if you think of it, you might know your Tony, you might know your vintage port, but then when we did the lecture about port, we went into like the real depth of it. So Tony can be age indicated, can be collator, age indicated can be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or very, very old. White port can do the same, and then you've got the ruby. We don't even go into there, whether it's filtered, unfiltered, crusted, not crusted. So it's a lot. And there's a port for every occasion, to be honest. It's just people don't really know about. Hence, I have a job and School of Port. And it's incredible value for money. For example, one of the top vintages that you can enjoy now is 1966. Most of us were not alive in 1966. That was back when Rolling Stones was on the up, but far from the top. And then there was a swinging 60s, and it was a fantastic vintage. Yet it just starts to, well, it drinks now well, but if you don't want to drink it and want to give it another 20 years, you're very welcome to, because it will just evolve even more. Now, that one, if you come to think of it, it's like loads of decades in the making, and yet you can buy it for, I think, somewhere between 300 and 600 pounds, depending on where you buy it. It's not a lot of money for drinking history, so it's incredible value for money, and for the mark of between 20 and 100 pounds, you can buy fantastic port wines to enjoy now. So I just want to check, everyone has wine number 1? Good, because I see a bottle here in front of me, so that's good. No, we're good. Everyone's got it, so that's fine. So these are the core values of port to think of. And then here comes the other sort of question time. Is that like, oh my God, is this the time already? Jesus, hope we'll have time to taste. Is it okay if we overrun to like 1 o'clock? Because we started a little late. 1 is good, good. So how do people perceive port? And I think I'm going to have to speed up a little bit with the questions. So I would love to have more discussion. But these are the questions that we normally ask ourselves and port producers, like, why do people drink port? Like, what comes to their mind when thinking about port? Someone said, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep using your example, the Dossitoni, but then you will understand why from the next slide on. Is like, when do people drink port? How does port consuming moment look like? So how do you imagine yourself drinking port? Are you out there partying in the pub, in wherever you go out partying, or are you at home by the fire and just enjoying a sip and then just everything's quiet? What's the dynamic of that?
Can we give you some suggestions from all of us?
Oh yes, of course, please.
What do you all think with food?
Oh yes, food. What matches with port?
Stilton.
Okay, that's Stilton and which port?
Ruby?
Yes, and most definitely that's a vintage one. It's your Christmas pairing, isn't it? Stilton and vintage port. Anyone? I mean, if you have something that comes in mind.
Very like traditional and warming, it feels like wintry, like a red port.
Okay.
Or a white port.
Okay, and what would you match it with? What would you drink it with? Dessert, perhaps?
It rounds off a meal.
It would. How about late bottle vintage port, if you guys know what it is? It's a beautiful ruby with a bit more oxidative character, but still very, very fruit forward. It has a slightly bitter finish, which makes it just a perfect pairing for dark chocolate. 70% is key. 70% dark chocolate is a very good combination with LBV, but then you can use your white port. So for example, you've got this white port in the glass. What would you drink it with? before it gets too warm, because the ideal service temperature for that is somewhere between 9 and 11 degrees, I would say. So what do you think? Okay, that can work. If the cheese isn't too pungent, then it can work, I think. Anyone? Someone knows port tonic. That's good. Yeah, port tonic as a cocktail. It's going to be fun. Half tonic, half white port, lemon, fresh mint, loads of ice cubes. Off you go for summer. But just one more, for example, it's fresh oysters. It's brilliant with fresh oysters. My God. But the question is, what do people think of port? And then the Symington Family Estate had this research done a few years ago in 2017, between 2016 and 17. And based on the internet research, what was found that these are the 5 key issues and problems that we have to, as a port producer, address. That A, it's a one type of port. So people in the UK, and it's UK specific as a research, think ruby port and predominantly vintage. That's all they have in mind. Anything beyond that rarely reaches the core. The other thing is it's often associated with posh and wealthy and conservative type people. You know, the judges and the big Tory voters, and like, so sorry about the Tory voters. That's the association that you can find online, funny enough, and not in a positive way, sadly. It's got nothing to do with the current political climate, by the way. It's just that was like 2016. We still had hope. The third one is that it's associated with old and masculine. So people think it's like old men drink port. Bottom line. And of course, cheese and cheese pairing. I think that cheeses come from different corners. That's true. This is what it's associated with. And with festive and wintry periods. So it's very, very a Christmas tradition here in the UK. Christmas and vintage port go together like pigs in blanket. So the port and lemon is the exception, but I think that was between the 2 world wars and then disappeared, and then it came back for like the 60s. 50s and 60s was not really a rich period in the UK. Hence, that was one drink that was, like have some cheap port and then add some lemonade to taste it better. So yeah, that was one important cultural heritage, but then still a lot of people, I mean, as you said, it's only the women that were drinking it, and in the pubs. At home, it was more like a male drink, and women had sherry instead, interestingly. But then it's not changing as fast as we would like, but then that's where School of Port comes in the picture. And now we are moving on to wine number 1. So this is what you've already seen the bottle as you were pouring it yourselves. And in the meantime, I think that number 2 can start going around whenever you guys are ready, while I'm talking about number 1. And then you guys smell and taste it. So I call it the unbearable lightness of being. It's incredibly light. I just love that. I think I had some sort of this vibe coming from this corner. I think you mentioned something along those lines. Absolutely. Now this is just perfect for that. So what you would see here is that basically we have to realize that there's a demand for something different than just a strong, deep, complex alcoholic drink. There was a demand for, so how do younger people drink their wines? They might not even want to go for wine, they might want to go for cocktails. They want something lighter, something not so heavy. Sadly, we have certain traditional and legal boundaries that we have to keep sport within. So the alcohol level, there's not much you can do about it because it's between 19 and 21% by law, if you want to call it port. But then you can exercise some creativity within the boundaries. So you can do grape varietal selection, for example. So you can choose the grape that works best for aroma and flavor. So that was, in this case, is Moscatel Gallego and Malvasia Fina. So this first is actually a blend of these 2 grapes, chosen for its extreme freshness and aromatic profile. It's flowery, it's citrusy. The first thing when I open it is always mesmerizes me. It's beautifully flowery. It's like walking into an orchard. And then it's lighter, it's fresher. There's a little less sugar, more acid to keep it fresher. So I think this is the lowest sugar level that you have here in the room compared with the other two. And then this one was created specifically with mixology in mind, because this is the perfect white port for your white port and tonic cocktail. If you don't like tonic, you can play around with the tonic. You can go for Mediterranean. It's a little less bitter, but then the sweetness of the port, bitterness of the tonic, the sourness of the lemon, the freshness of the mint together is just magical. Portuguese people drink that for ages. It's kind of a new phenomenon here, but hopefully it will catch up. Yeah, how do you guys like it? It's super fresh. I hope it's it's still not too warm. As I said, ideal service temperature would be 9 to 11 degrees. It's not well chilled. And for the cocktail, you would use chunky ice cubes to keep it fresh. If you look at it, it's not just. So basically, there are two things happened here. First, you have to invent something that didn't exist before, because white port is white port, but then something that focuses on freshness, on lightness, is something entirely new. And then you have to make it look the part. If you look at it, is this how you imagine a port bottle? Really? There's no cobwebs here. There's no old wine cellars. So yes, this is something that you have to come up with to create the product. So as I said, you keep the core values, the high quality, it's fresh, but then you add the right clothes to it, and you make it represent new ideas to meet the new demand of, so like the changing idea of what's attractive. Is there a question there? Yeah. Symingtons are quite traditional, and it's not the question of what the port producers think about. The question is, like, what do consumers think about? And the sales numbers say they do love it. Every time I saw it open in bars, restaurants, people just loved it. Port producers must accept the fact that they produce wine for the consumers, not for their own liking. So if you're a port producer and you just do what you like and don't care about what people like, then you are in a dead end, really. But then this is not just the Symington brands. There are other brands that do very similar packaging, lightness, pre-mixed cocktails. So Croft, Sandeman, just to name a few. Taylor's have canned port tonic already. So it's there. And they do understand that the entire category needs this sort of revamping and understanding what's attractive these days and what not. And when it comes to attraction, this is wine number 2, and I hope that everyone has it. And I think in the meantime, we can start wine number 3, if you don't mind. So wine number 2 is Ruby category, and it's Graham's 6 grapes, which is widely available actually in the UK, thank God. Mostly at wine specialists, so I think it's not one of the supermarket ports. The importer focuses on wine-specific stores, but then it's easily available. And you can always buy it online. It's one of the flagship Ruby reserves for Graham's. And if you look at it, it looks pretty, isn't it? Yet, these look a little old school, a bit sort of like my parents might like it. My friends, I don't know. So it had to be sort of redesigned. This is a wine, so there's a true story behind it. So the reason why it's called 6 grapes is that from the early history of Graham's, they use these grape symbols on the pipes, on the wooden casks, to designate the quality level of the wine inside. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 grapes, and 6 grapes being the top quality, destined for vintage port, which is bottle-aged, super ageable wine. But not all of it ended up there. Some turned into a reserve Ruby, fine filtered and ready to go. From the early 1900s, they sell 6 grapes. But obviously the world changed a lot over 120 something years. And then what used to be very attractive was deemed old school, boring, out of date. And then while you kept what's inside, because it's, just let me know if you disagree with me, but it's insanely fresh, vibrant, fruity. It's a perfect everyday port. they had to make it look more relevant. So keeping what's inside, you didn't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already perfect, but you had to make it look nicer. And it's also one of those things that I said, it's all these sports here today actually use the same closure, which is basically, it's a stopper cork. You don't need a corkscrew or anything, you just get rid of the foil and you just pop it and enjoy it, and then you can plug it back if you haven't finished. I call all these sports like plug and play, really, because there's no need for fancy equipment, no need for decanting, saying a prayer, facing towards Porto. No, it's just you drink it, you enjoy it as much as you like, and then you can put it back in the fridge for a certain period of time, depending on the category. So Graham's 6 Grapes is a perfect example of keeping what you have, keeping what you value most, keep the core values, but always have to make it more relevant. So in the meantime, we're moving on to the next wine, which is about to land in everyone's glass. It is the Wars Ultima 10-year-old Tawny. Now, just to decipher, Wars is the wine brand that used to be owned by the War family. It's the oldest British-owned, still functioning wine producer in Porto. Dates back to the late 1600s. So they do it for some time. They know how to do good port. But what they also have to do now under the Symington leadership is making sure that the ports are meeting the demand from a new audience, per se. So what we have here, although it's basically the combination of the first two. So we have the Tawny port, and the 10-year-old Tawny port has to have a certain taste, flavor, aroma characteristic in order to be able to, so the producer can call it a 10-year-old Tawny. But then within this category and the boundaries that there's a legal boundary for the wine region, the regulations, you can play around with some freshness, a little less sugar, a little more acid, grapes coming from higher altitude, slightly fresher, so that the eventual blend, so when it's the age indicated Tawny, just in brackets, if it says 20-year-old, it means that the average age of the blend in that wine is 20 years old. So it might be some 15-year-old, some 28-year-old or 30-year-old, and then it's blended together to create a 20-year-old Tawny. In this case, it's 10-year-old. It's still quite fruitful with some hint of nuttiness, some freshness, but I'm sure that you can experience it yourselves. But what happens is that, just look at the bottle. I mean, I don't know if the bottle's around somewhere. Oh yeah, there you go. It's beautiful, it's sleek, it's clear, it's transparent. You can see the beautiful color of the drink. And it's only half a liter. So again, it emphasizes the message that people in this day and age don't drink that much alcohol. So we would like to encourage them to drink less, but better. So these are the small elements that you have to apply, that altogether these are not small at all, one step at a time, but if you put them together, that's a huge change. So I think this is, and you'll be the judge of it, I mean, this is a fresh, super approachable wine. It's still got that lovely nuttiness that you already have, that oxidative character. It's smooth. And then you also have to talk the talk. So I think apart from the blend number 5, the white port, the other two, Ultima and the 6 Grapes, they have their own dedicated website. In terms of communication-wise, white port is often found as a sponsor for certain sports or cocktail competitions. Last year they were at the Pardo competition here in the UK as an official sponsor. They had a port and tonic place where you could enjoy your port and tonic. So it's the communication, who you talk to and how you talk to. Forget about all the acidity level and all that malarkey. You just talk about the joy of drinking wine, because that's really what it's all about. This is how you approach, I reckon, your customers. And is there a question, Rebecca? I can see a question mark coming up.
No, above my head. I just had to say, as well as looking at that bottle, as soon as these arrived for us, I was so taken by the case that this comes in. I think it's so beautiful, something like this. It matches exactly what you've been saying about, like, it's fresh, it's modern, but it's actually still incredibly traditional.
Yes.
Perfect. round. Oh,
Please do. No, please do. Please do. No. Just for final word to it. Anyone knows why we have a tube for this glass? Why don't we just sell the glass? There you go, wine students. I love it. Yes, a transparent glass is beautiful. It's fantastic, but not very practical because the wine needs protection from the light. And if you chuck it on a supermarket shelf for a prolonged period of time, that wouldn't do any good for the wine unless it's protected in a tube. So, yeah.
It just in terms of like the bottle shapes, none of them look like a typical port bottle.
Absolutely. They look like something that we hope is fresh and
This is kind of the point of
absolutely. I mean, vintage port bottles would still be very traditional as the purpose of that wine and the audience for that wine would expect it. But not these ones. These are the answers to a sort of like a new challenge of like how to reach you guys and everyone in this age group. And it's so good to see that it's like you represent actually the UK drinking wine market in terms of like age brackets and probably cultural background. So it's good. It's good to have you here, guys. Final thoughts before we finish is shaping the image of port, and this is what School of Port is about, supporting what you've already seen on the product side. So follow the change of time in one hand. So look at the demographic changes. What worked in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s might not work now at all. How do people drink? How the drinking behavior changed? I'm sure you all heard about a low and no trend, for example. It's very difficult to match that with fortified wines, but then as you can see, we're up for the challenge. We have to look at challenger products and substitutes. What if people don't want to drink wine at all? What if they chose cocktails? Then we create something for the mixologists. But if they want to drink canned products, then we will create canned port tonic. And canned wine is already a big thing anyway, at least here in the UK, most definitely. You have to adapt to your environment. So if it's bag in the box, if it's canned wines, if that's what people want to drink, then you can't say like, oh, I don't care because I want to put it in a bottle. Well, then that's fine because no one's going to buy it. So you have to think a little bit outside the box. Glass is getting thinner, actually. So it looks slightly more slender, but it's also getting thinner for many years now. So this is exactly the direction we would go. It's part of the sustainability commitment. And it's not just Symington's. I think that if you've heard about the Porto Protocol, for example, which started in Porto, but it's like a local and global climate change initiative to make sure that winemakers do whatever they can to change, sort of like to adapt to climate change. It's not really to change it, it's changing already. But then that's part of the adapt to your environment and know your competitors, so you should know what other people do in the port world. So now the word is out, this is what Graham's does, this is what Woos does, so hopefully other port producers will follow if they can. And then of course there's the talk the talk part, as I mentioned already. So you have to stay relevant. If you still look dusty and cobwebby and old school, then it might appeal to a certain part of the market, but not for everyone. And then you would like to open up to be more inclusive. Remember that posh, rich idea, conservative idea. No, we want to include everyone because everyone should enjoy. If you go to Portugal, you will see that everyone, young, old, conservative, liberal, doesn't matter, they enjoy port. They find their own port because it's extremely versatile. And of course, even good wine needs bush. If you don't talk about it because people will find it, then the final quote will tell you exactly what the answer to that. But then you need to talk about your wine. You have to let the people know, and you have to know where people listen. So if you want TV ads, that might be a waste of money. Just saying. Can be part of a good marketing mix, but I think it's not something that I would start with. And you have to tell your story right, really. There's new generation, new ways of defining attraction and what's attractive to people. And as I said, where are your customers? What are the new channels of communication? 25 years ago, there was internet, because no one was using it, or very, very few people. And then now, it's in my pocket, it's in my watch, it's everywhere. So you have to understand where it is. And of course, you have to. I forgot to mention fighting the tyranny of the predictable, which is an important motto for us. When it's predictable, it's boring. So let's move on and do something exciting and fun, like with these bottle designs, for example. And then basically, this is the final quote I wanted to leave you with from the esteemed Rothschild family. So if you enter the wine business, just some advice: the most difficult part is the first 200 years. So if you're patient and if you make something extraordinary, and then after 200 years, people will recognize it, and you don't need any bush. But other than that, you do. And just remember that winemaking is really not measured in years, it's measured in generations. So I always say that if you are the best position to be born into a winemaking family, start young, do it until an old age, you still have a very finite number of opportunity to create something special. You can easily count it 60 maximum. So you have to plan long term. And this is what works best for sort of like a family. It's like raising a family. You have to think long term, and you have to think what you have now is actually something that you will have to pass on to your next generation. And your aim should be to pass on something that's stronger and more sustainable than the one that you are entrusted with. And I hope that this was a good occasion to actually show you guys that we are not sitting on our laurels just because there's 130 years of history behind the company. They work very hard to keep it relevant, with a huge team of very creative people, not just on the wine side, but on everywhere else. And I hope you enjoyed these wines, but thank you so much for your time. And I think I'll let you go on to your next lecture, because you spent most of your lunchtime with us, but absolutely appreciate it. And thank you very much indeed. I will ask my colleague to end the live session. Thank you very much, everyone who joined us in the live. Thank you.